The Genesis came out in 1989.
In North America.
In North America. The Super Nintendo came out 2.5 years later. They had a huge head start.
I remember playing it at that time, and I remember being blown away by the graphics. I mean, the first time I played Altered Beast, which was the first game I ever played.
Wow.
I didn't know graphics like that existed. I mean, I really, honestly didn't. I was blown away by those graphics. But after playing the game for like 10 minutes, it was like, okay, the graphics are nice, but I'm going to be over here playing Mario 3.
And then you beat the game in 20 minutes.
Yeah, that game was easy, but it was like, yeah, I think I want to go play Mario 3 over here because it's just fun.
It's just more fun. And then you fast forward to 1991, 1992. The Super Nintendo gets released in North America, and now you've got two 16-bit systems. Actually, you have three if you want to count the TurboGrafx 16.
Did not know a single soul who
not
owned
soul.
one or who had ever owned one. Ever.
And yeah.
In this part of the country, I don't know what it was.
It's a shame because I ended up getting a TurboGrafx 16 just a few months ago for the first time and playing it for the first time with a pretty good pile of games. And I got to say, these games are really well-made games.
It was a quality system.
Very well-made games. And
Sega was, I'll give a lot of credit to Sega. They were the first company in video game history to really understand that gamers were growing up. Prior to the Genesis, every video game from Pong to Atari to Nintendo, especially Nintendo, just had this mindset of this is a toy, it's a kid's machine. Mm-hmm. In the early 90s, Sega's marketing department, I'll give them a lot of credit for this. They said, look, yes, video games were for kids at one time, but those kids are now getting older.
Exactly.
They're teenagers now. They're still playing games, they're still spending money, they're just a little bit older. So now we're going to go after that. It's got to be faster and edgier. And
it's got to be cool.
And it's got to be cool. Yeah. Fast forward a couple years after that, and we had these adult games, and by adult I mean, blood and guts,
right.
The Mortal Kombat kind of games, and Sega was happy to have all the blood and all that mature content on their console. Nintendo was still stuck in this mentality of, no, this is a kid's machine, we can't have kids exposed to this, and so the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat was edited a lot.
Sega just did the math. Your 9-year-old in 1987 was now 14 and 15 years old by the time 1991 and 2 rolled around.
And I think the other video game companies incorrectly assumed that 9-year-old just stopped playing games when he got older.
Right. You turn on Altered Beast. It was a pack-in game for the Genesis, and it says, "Welcome to your doom." And there's skeletons everywhere. It's not a game necessarily that you want your 5-year-old to play. Let's talk about the games that Nintendo did come out with in the early years of the SNES. I mean, Super Mario World, Pilot Wings was another early title. Games like Super Mario Kart. I mean, Super Mario Kart ended up in the advertising for the Genesis. Remember, because they were trying to show how fast their games were. Right. And then they showed Super Mario Kart. It was like, they showed a clip of Mario on a cart sort of just bumping into somebody in the sand or something. It was really slow and not really... It doesn't look very much fun. Super Mario Kart ended up being one of the best games on the system. I mean, you look at these games and you go, oh yeah, they're kiddie, they're childish. They're still amazing games. The Super Nintendo had a Castlevania game. They had a different one.
They had Bloodlines. We had Contra.
Contra. They had a... the SNES had Contra. The Genesis had a different Contra.
Right.
SNES had Final Fight. They had Streets of Rage. SNES had the Final Fantasy series. They had the Phantasy Star series. And then there were games like Shinobi. I'm sure it's a great game. SNES never had a Shinobi game. The first couple of years, when we were really young, it was like, oh, Super Nintendo's better, it's just better. And you didn't really have an argument, right? After a few years, you ended up actually playing these games. I remember playing Mortal Kombat 2 for the first time, playing Street Fighter 2 for the first time on the Genesis, and just scratching my head going, this actually passed as a video game? I had always been loyal to the SNES, but my arguments, argument on the playground was always like, oh, there's more colors on the Super Nintendo, and And it has the Mode 7 graphics, and I would say all these
scaling
things
and rotation
that I would read in a magazine.
Okay, yeah.
I didn't
you didn't understand.
I didn't understand any of it. And then all of a sudden we got into this era. Nintendo, along with second and third party developers, were coming out with 3 Donkey Kong Country games.
Between Square and Rare.
Square and Rare, yeah.
Which...
Secret of Mana.
Oh, man.
Final Fantasy 3. Chrono Trigger, for crying out loud. And then Nintendo gave us Super Metroid, right?
Yoshi's Island.
Yoshi's Island, the Super FX chip for some of these games. Really prolonged.
Star Fox, which I know it hasn't aged well, but at the time, Star Fox was pretty mind-blowing to play that in 1994. It really was.
Mario RPG was another one that was a collaboration between Square and Nintendo. And those are the twilight years of the Super Nintendo system. It was defined by some of the best video games that have ever been made. I mean, I don't know about you, but like Super Metroid and Final Fantasy 3 would probably make a top 10 list
Yoshi's
for me.
Island,
and Yoshi's Island,
Chrono Trigger.
Yeah. I mean, these games are outstanding. During that time period, what was Sega doing? Sega was giving us the Sega CD, because CDs were the wave of the future. And then after that, they gave us the 32X. They went back to cartridges after that. And, you know, they're giving us Night Trap and all these gimmicky full-motion video games and showing us all this more powerful technology. And Nintendo was just going, here's Super Metroid.
But they decided in 1992 or 93 that they didn't want to wait that long, so they were going to beat Nintendo with better hardware. So then came the Sega CD, then came the 32X. And by the time they did release the Saturn, I honestly believe that was what their struggle was with a lot of their followers, a lot of their gamers.
I think so.
Were just like, dude, Sega. I mean, the Sega CD launched for $300 in 1993, and you had to have a Genesis to get that to work. I mean, do the math.
1993 money? I mean, $300? What would that be today?
That was a good chunk of change.
Yep.
And you're right, Sega kind of took the fall. Meanwhile, Nintendo was like, you know what, we're just going to double down on software.
Yep.
And between Rare and Square, man, the twilight years of the Super Nintendo were some of the best.
Even Capcom, they were giving us these Mega Man X games at the time. Yep. What a time to be a gamer.
And what they were able to squeeze, especially Rare, with the Donkey Kong Country series and the Super FX chip, what they were able to squeeze out of the Super Nintendo in the last few years was really amazing.
You had one or the other, and because of that, you were on one side or you were on the other side.
You had already made your investment when you got one.
Yeah.
You had already declared your allegiance.
Yep.
And it was like, this is it. This is me. And, you know, I think a lot of the Genesis kids, on the back of their minds, after a while, they kind of knew they chose poorly.
Especially in 1994. Yeah, I think so. Like, you had your system and your games, and if you went to your mom or your dad and you said, I would also like to have a Super Nintendo for Christmas, they'd be like, no. If you didn't live through it, it's hard to even describe to people.
It's funny because looking back on it, it was a bunch of kids arguing, and most of them didn't even understand what they were talking about. The Genesis kids would be like, "We got the blast processing," and the Super Nintendo kids would be like, "We got the parallax scrolling," and this. No one. We didn't even really know what a bit was. Like, oh, the 16-bit, you know, that was heavily marketed. But like, talk to any 10-year-old back then.
What's a bit?
Ask him what a bit is. He won't have any idea.
That's for a couple of years, and I can remember playing Super Metroid for the first time, and when you would get that, I don't know what they call it, the sprint shoes or whatever, and you had to run through those corridors as fast as you could and break all those blocks out of your way. I remember doing that, and the speed of Samus as she ran through blew my mind away. And I just remember thinking, is Sonic really faster than this game? I'm not so sure.
I remember playing Final Fantasy 3/6 and just flying around in the airship.
Yeah.
How fast that was with no slowdown. And I remember thinking the same thing. Like, really? Like, there are faster games than this, and would you even need something faster than this? I mean, I don't know. And even a game like Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally, it's a pretty lousy game. But it was pretty... There were parts of it that were really fast.
Yeah, without any slowdowns.
It was no slowdown.
It was legitimately fast. So this leads us to the ultimate question. Who won the war? Right? I mean, we all know who won the War of 1812.
Sure, The U.S. one.
The U.S. one. So who won the 16-bit war?
And by the end of the Super Nintendo era, you had Rare publishing Killer Instinct on the Super Nintendo. I mean, it was, and not to talk about Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 and a whole bunch of, very mature kind of games that found their way on Super Nintendo. And so I think what Sega did was very important, and I think it was necessary and it had to happen, and I'm glad it happened. There are some legitimately good Genesis games out there.
Yeah.
They're not the ones that most people think of when they think of Genesis. Most people are like, oh, Sonic and all the arcade ports and the Golden Axe.
I don't care about any of those
Those games really are not that good, people. I know people are going to disagree on this, but they're just not.
No.
If you dig a little deeper, there are some real gems on the Genesis.
Hardware sales-wise, Nintendo obviously won. They probably sold 40 or 50% more consoles than Sega did. I think Sega really just hit the panic button over and over again because they had the 2.5-year head start on the Super Nintendo with Genesis. Things were looking good, and then all of a sudden, Super Nintendo comes out and it's outselling the Genesis 2-1, 3-1, and so Sega, in a panic, I think, just went, okay, here's Game Gear, here's a Sega CD, here's a 32X, here's a Saturn, here's all this hardware that nobody asked for. Who asked for the 32X? Nobody asked for this thing. Another quick story. I remember, so in 1994, we moved to a new town, brand new school. Day one. I remember day one of this school. So we were freshmen.
Okay.
I sat down near some kids in a classroom, and the first thing I brought up was video games because in my mind,
what else do you want to talk about?
What else are we going to talk about? And in my mind, I was really worried because I didn't really know what people in this school, what their system was.
Right.
And I had a real fear. I don't know about you, but I had a real fear of going into this school and then finding out that everyone loved the Genesis. And I just thought, oh, I really hope that isn't the case. And I brought up like video games somehow. And I remember one kid specifically. I think it was Duncan. He said, "Yeah, this school is really a Super Nintendo school." And I didn't really show a lot of emotion when he said that. But inside, I was so relieved. I couldn't even tell you how happy I was to hear that. And as it turned out, he was right. I mean, almost everybody I knew had a Super Nintendo, even people that didn't really game much. You sit next to these people every day who are just kind of bookworms and stuff and nerds and whatever, and it's like, wait a minute, you have a Super Nintendo? And they're like, well, yeah, everybody has a Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
I was really thankful for that. Nintendo won, by the way.
They did, but I still say that it was very important what Sega did.
Yeah.
And we're all better off because of it. If Sega hadn't done that when they did, Nintendo was the leader of that industry. They would have kept dragging that line of gamers are all little kids.
Take out the blood in Mortal Kombat again.
They would have kept dragging that line, and the entire industry with it for several more years, probably until the PlayStation came around.
If it wasn't for Sega, the Super Nintendo would have never had that version of Mortal Kombat 2. It would have been completely without blood and without fatalities.
It's true.
So we owe that to Sega as much as
what they did was very important.
It was very important.